Hello and welcome to another edition of Radio Yes Cymru on your favourite podcast apps and on the Yes Cymru YouTube channel. I'm Siôn Jobbins and with me today is Colin Nosworthy. Hello, Colin.
Hi, Sean. How you doing?
Sorry, you're going to choke on your cup of tea or coffee there.
It's fine.
Yeah, so Colin's been on the podcast a couple of times, but I thought it'd be interesting to have him back on. Former head of communications with Plaid Cymru, a former SPAD, so special advisor, working on the Plaid and Labour agreement, which has come to an end now, and then founder of Melin Drafod, pro-independence think tank. So, Colin, there's things there, loads of things we need to discuss. And I think if we are serious about independence, we need to have a pro-independence party in government, hopefully leading in the government, certainly in government, I think, to get that step closer. So there's loads happening the last couple of weeks. The election, obviously, with Donald Trump winning in America, and a couple of polls here, I think maybe sort of give people an idea what's going to happen in 18 months. So, Col, welcome to the podcast. What's your general take on the American election?
Oh, wow, Sean. I think one thing I would say is that some of the analysis has been very disappointing in terms of an analysis about identity politics rather than an analysis about from a class politics perspective and what is really driving the growth of the far right over a long period of time now. For me, it's a culmination of neoliberalism that, has started in the latter part of the 20th century and is now reaching a culmination with people like Trump. And, it does really put into focus the failure of centrist parties to deliver social and economic justice. And I think, unfortunately, I heard some analysis on S4C about how, America's not ready to elect a woman. I think that's a poor analysis, to be frank. I think it's actually about the failure of centrism to address the underlying social and economic injustices. And so whilst obviously there's an element of like identity analysis that needs to be given, I think what one needs to look at in terms of tackling the far right are these fundamental social and economic questions, which a lot of centrists, a lot of liberals, as they're called in particularly the States, don't want to, they can't face up to when they can. Perhaps by not facing up to them, they're facilitating the rise of the far right, completely unintentionally. But, you could look back on Biden and obviously I don't want this to happen in the nations of Britain, as it Starmer, as being a facilitator of far right politics by presenting an image of tackling underlying social and economic injustice, but actually not delivering that.
Okay, we're getting to how maybe the American election impacts, if it does, on the Senate elections in 2026. And I think that'd be interesting how that crosses over or already has. So what you're saying essentially, Colin, is, you think that the centre-left, want a better word, hasn't tackled the root problems of lack of growth in people's incomes, stagnation in standard of living, essentially. We've all got mobile phones, so obviously we feel in one respect better than we did maybe 20 years ago when we didn't have mobile phones. But in another case, in my case, I could buy a home 20 years ago. My kids are almost the age I luckily bought my first house on a fairly average wage. I'm not looking to do that. So I think that's what. So this is the thing with the right to also say that you've got all your mobile phones, eating your avocados, you're rich, which is absolutely crazy because a mobile phone costs less than buying Daily Mail every day. But I mean, but there's been stagnation. You think that hasn't been tackled by the Blair government, and that Starmer is doing the same mistake, and Biden. Now, I'll just come back to this quickly, but I don't want to go too much into American identity politics because we got enough stuff to discuss here in Wales. But if you look at Biden's track record, it did do a lot of stuff which Sanders wanted to do, in terms of policies, in terms of wages, in terms of infrastructure, spend on infrastructure in in the USA. And even with that, he still lost, which seems, from what seems now, is a very close margin, much closer than he did a couple of weeks ago. So is that really the thing, or is it something which the right have managed to latch onto it, an ill feeling or an ease about parts of the left agenda, and they exploited that as political parties do in any part in their government.
So I'm a bit of a determinist when it comes to analysis of history, in the sense that my general opinion is that the lack of socialism being implemented worldwide undermines, weakens the balance you had, and for all its failings, the balance you had during the Cold War between a quote unquote socialist system. There's a lot to be said about that, but it was a bulwark against the capitalist societies moving forward to the right, because what they saw was what you had was like a tension between these two systems that produced a middle ground. So, that's one way of analyzing the collapse of the USSR, whilst a quote unquote victory for capitalism is actually ultimately could be seen as its undoing, because without a counterpoint, you have unfettered capitalism. And I think a lot of another thing a factor that's relevant is like disinformation, isn't it? And a lot of people play on that, and that certainly is a factor. But actually, I would consider it as just one example of a lack of regulation, i.e., we have an unfettered market, quote unquote, for information, but what you're having is these monopolies being created, which are like total free-for-alls in which disinformation isn't controlled, and therefore you're getting conspiracy theories rising up and gaining this traction. But that's just one example of what unfettered capitalism gives you.
Yeah, and in that respect, it'd be interesting to see when the Senedd election happens, that the bill going through the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, I think authored by Adam Price, in terms of politicians won't be able to lie. Now, how that is actually implemented is another question. And what is a lie? I think that can be done if people are, deliberately giving wrong information. How that gets done is another question, but I think it is a small part of trying to balance this, where you're having all kinds of nonsense going about the place. And that's not people not disagreeing with something, but things which are blatantly not true.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about the detail of that particular policy, but it is fair enough to make a point about, like, we need a whole system regulation of the information market.
Yeah.
America moved away from a distinction between opinion and fact and the need for balance in television cable coverage decades ago, something that hasn't happened here, although GB News is kind of like an interesting example, and the weakening, the Ofcom as a weak regulator is quite an interesting example of the failings. But and there is indeed a lot to be said about that. But I think as I say, that is definitely an example of where there's a gaping hole of regulation, which is kind of just a microcosm of the wider problem about how neoliberalism destroys itself and creates a fertile ground for what I would describe Trump as a neo-fascist, undoubtedly.
Yeah, and we'll right. Let's move on to Wales then, because and the situation here. So obviously we're here in Yes Cymru. We want to see an independent Wales. To have that, you need to have a party in the Senedd government to begin with, which can put a bill down for a referendum or whatever, a vote on independence. I think we've got a few steps before that, let's be honest about it, in terms of building confidence in the Senedd as an institution. But so we're looking essentially at a Plaid Cymru-led government, be that in some kind of coalition, or maybe if the Greens get a seat, then that's an option, but they would never be enough to tip the balance, I don't think. We maybe discuss the machinations of that later on, but looking at the landscape at the moment, there's been a couple of polls where essentially Labour is still the biggest party, though the vote is down. Plaid is second party, somewhere in the low 20s. Then you have Reform in third place and the Tories in fourth place. Now, the election is 18 months away. I think most people haven't, apart from people like yourself and I, Colin, haven't really just thought so much about it. So I wouldn't put too much credence in it. But there's obviously a situation where Reform, I would imagine, buoyed by the election in Trump, where Farage spending more time in America than it seems to be in Clacton, will be taking notes from that. So how do we, in the independence movement, and including Plaid Cymru, fight that? You're talking about disinformation. We're seeing there's a big push at the moment with the farmers issue, with the reform. And also, and as you know, there are people who vote for reform who could just as easily be voting Labour, possibly Plaid as well. I think most of them, maybe 50, come from Tory party. But there's people there who could just as easily possibly voting or supporting independence for Wales. I mean, how do we make sure that the main driving force in the next election is power for Wales and not some kind of nativist policy, or something about immigration, which the Assembly can't do anything about, or something about issues which aren't relevant, particularly to the Senedd?
There's an awful lot to be unpacked
Yes.
there, but the
Sorry.
first thing I would say is there is a massive opportunity for Plaid Cymru in this election.
Right.
Massive opportunity. Look, what Plaid Cymru needs to do is to say what's obvious. But look, the people with the best chance of defeating the #1 party is the people who are in second. And so the choice is whether you want more Labour government or a change with the Plaid Cymru government-led government. And so, there is a massive opportunity for Plaid Cymru. And I know they have a lot of very clever people looking at how they can exploit that opportunity. And, they're on the back of a successful election. It was a successful election. It was the highest percentage of the vote ever in a Westminster election for Plaid, the highest proportion of Westminster seats from Wales for Plaid. They are the clear opposition party, main opposition party in Westminster in Wales. So they have that fillip, they have that record of success. And they will understand, the thinkers there, that the 2026 election is a totally different type of election to the one we've had this year. It requires Plaid Cymru to present itself as it is, an all Wales, a national party, and to be fighting a national election. And it has a massive opportunity if it can get the resources to compete with the Labour Party, which is an enormously powerful and well-resourced party. In the sense, not considering just the Welsh level, but the UK level as well, which resources will be sent to Wales, no doubt. So that's the first thing to say. So I also think that, and I wrote an article, a very lengthy article in Golwg Trychwechdem about this. I do genuinely believe that there's likely to be a referendum on independence within the next 10 years. I say that because I do think Plaid Cymru are going to do well in these elections. I do think that the game has changed in terms of the internal debate about Plaid Cymru, in the sense that independence is the constitutional aim. Right. And this is an opportunity to make progress on that. In terms of, you're talking about how to tackle the far right, then there are so many different answers. There's not one silver bullet to that. There's a lot to be said about that. But I think one element of it is to present an agenda that does inspire people, that's a genuine tackling of social and economic justice can happen and is deliverable. So that's just one element. There's an awful lot to be said about how one defeats the far right forces.
Okay. I mean, okay. Let's dig into that. So, I mean, I'm excited to think there'll be a referendum in 10 years' time on
within
independence.
10 years.
Well, yes, I think at the moment that's quite optimistic. I mean, it sort of makes sense with my little pet theory that things come around in the circles of about 18 years. So after big events. So a big event was in 2014, 2016 with the Scottish independence referendum, then Brexit. So 18 years onto that, yeah, we're looking at something like 2032, 2034. So that sort of makes sense, Colin. So I mean, I think about that time there will be something big, because I think it's a bit of generation change. So yeah, you could be right. So to build onto that, we obviously need to have a pro-independence nationalist party So we'll discuss on what kind of things you think Plaid should be doing if they get into power in a minute. To get to power in the first place, discussing, as we've discussed, the issues of the mass media, of lies being floated about the place, the finance, the very deep pockets of the Labour Party, who are anti-independence, of course, and Reform and Tories. So what kind of things? I mean, I think Plaid Cymru here in Aberystwyth are discussing about having, street rallies against Crown Estate, probably starting in the new year now, just to get people on the streets, to get people seeing Plaid doing something, and connecting with people who may then go on social media, because you can't avoid that, but trying to bypass the social media noise as well. So I think that'd be kind of tactics I'd like to see a pro-independence party advocate and implement and support, and obviously tackle the daily issues on things like the fuel poverty. Are those kind of things you're looking for, or do you think there's something else? Or I mean, or is it
Yes.
just basically just chuck loads of money on social media and that's it? That is the answer.
So yeah, fortunately, it's no longer a question that I'm deeply involved in. But I would say there is an element to which there's a truth that, that a mass movement approach, on the ground mass movement approach, is one of the answers, because you need to tackle, in an age of disinformation at so many levels, the on the ground mass campaigning is certainly part of the answer. I do fundamentally think that there's like a question. There's a question about the choice people have about looking for a UK-based answer or a Welsh-based answer.
Right.
You wouldn't, obviously don't put it in those terms, but people have to make a choice whether they want to change that's aimed at delivering for people in Wales, or it's some kind of outside force that's trying to force an agenda that is not in the best interests of Wales. So I do think there's a way of framing the far right in the same kind of light as that kind of light. Yeah, there also is an element of a sort of like a Welsh patriotism that should be appealed to. I mean, I'm not a big one for banners and flags and whatever, but I do feel that there's an extent to which, if we can win people who might be misled or misguided into thinking that, these far right forces offer an answer, I think some of those people, and certainly there's an element of, need to talk to people one-to-one on that basis, but there's an element of that you can appeal to a sense of nationhood, Welsh nationhood, that can draw these people away from those dark forces and into a more progressive sense of the choice. And I think, that is uncomfortable for me personally, in the sense that, I'm an internationalist, and ironically, those people, I'm massively pro-independence, and we were involved in setting up Yes Cymru, whatever. I think I sort of have to put that to one side to say, look, we need to use the appeal of the Welsh nation, which is very popular in all its trappings, to say, look, this is a progressive tent that provides an alternative that can provide the change you're looking for, rather than
it needs to be a vehicle for people's anger.
Yeah,
I mean, the old banners, the old Yes Cymru banners and bridges gets a bit of knocking on social media, but I tell you, it's worth turning up with it to see how positive it is. There's just so many people hooting the horn and waving and stuff. There is a
basic truth in this, isn't there? Independence creates the opportunity for a break from a system that is letting so many people down, on so many levels. So it's not kind of an exploitation of Welsh nation. Really, it's just saying, look, independence is a chance to break from this.
Well, it's a vehicle for change, isn't it?
Yeah,
and I think so with the old banners on bridges, I think it's interesting to see how people do connect with it. I mean, I think some people are waving, it's slightly sarcastic, but I think that's like 5 or 10%. People are generally quite happy to see you there, and I think part of it is partially they're just happy to see people doing something for Wales. And I think it's almost
yeah.
as simple as that. Like, oh, someone is fighting for Wales, fighting for me. I know the Welsh brand, despite all the complexes and the psychiatrist chair, which of the Welsh nationhood and complexes, which we can discuss, Colin, it's still very popular. And, we're talking it after the day after the Wales beating Iceland last night. And, it's just a buzz. People actually quite like Wales.
But
And it's
every
quite,
generation,
and
every
it's also quite a
generation.
tactile, and I understand the point about, there can be a dark side to any kind of nationalism, including Welsh nationalism. But I think the Welsh nationality is by and large quite tactile and quite a cushy one, if I can use that term. It's it's quite fluffy and quite warm, and I think people actually feel close to that. So I think Plaid should be and do, but not be afraid of it.
But I think every generation, all nations are imagined, aren't they?
Yes.
Every generation reimagines the nation, and we have an opportunity to reimagine the nation as a counterpoint to the forces of darkness that are coming from.
But also, I think people like I think there's constituency of people who like the idea of a strong Wales, especially as now we got a fairly weak UK. And I think that strength is seen as fighting for their own personal and family and, almost, if you say, class issues. And I say as someone who's not as left-wing as you, Colin, then I think that's something which can be very powerful. They think, okay, Wales is being screwed. Wales is being asset stripped. And I think that's something which anyone in Wales understands, because there's a history of coals, history of slate, history of water. It's now happening with pylons. It's now happening with wind power. It's now going to happen with Crown Estate. And they apply kind of message. We've been screwed, and just use those simple words. We've been screwed. We've been exploited. We've been asset stripped by Westminster. Tory Labour makes no difference. And I think there's a lot of people who understand that, because that is literally their family history. If you are a coal miner or a farmer as well. And I think that combined with a happy and welcoming patriotism, I think, but also strong and sometimes quite blunt, I think is something which Plaid can and should be using.
I just want to go back to that point you were talking about the banners on bridges. I think it's interesting because I did see some bizarre comments, people belittling people for going on banners with bridges. A change only happens when people take some small action, and every small action makes a difference. And I think it was bizarre for anyone to belittle that, because it's kind of like, that's where all movements make a difference, from Just Stop Oil to Greenpeace. These movements make a massive difference globally. Black Lives Matter, these mass movements make a massive difference, and absolutely fundamental to democracy and to democratic change. So to belittle that is bizarre. I was actually thinking about one of the first Yes Cymru meetings. Where do you draw the point? Where there were like 7 people there, and there were more apologies than people who turned up. But a group of 7 people can make a massive difference. Massive difference. So I did take umbrage at the kind of belittling of people going out on,
and also
exercising their democratic right to propose a change for society.
And also, just to stay on the balance on bridges. I mean, not everyone writes manifestos. Not everyone writes policy papers, and even fewer people read them as well, I think. Yes Cymru, Plaid Cymru, all movements need to have that ballast, those articles, and hopefully this podcast in some tiny way adds to that as well. But what the Balance on Bridges does is, over that weekend, I think it's 2 weeks ago, Yes Cymru did, literally thousands of people would have seen those banners on bridges in person in their own cars or vans or buses. Add to that, people seeing it on social media. So when you're then talking about independence in this company, they've literally seen in signs say independence is normal. And that's a part of your argument is being done. It is being normalized by that. And, again, if I was Plaid Cymru, I'd be looking at having some kind of banners and bridges for Plaid Cymru. Why not do something simple like that? It gets people involved. Not a lot of people I hate canvassing, but, some people will do that and they enjoy it. And maybe then they go canvassing. Maybe then they have more confidence to speak to someone in work when someone raises an issue about independence or whatever it may be. Or also maybe that person in work actually just Googles to see what Yes Cymru or whatever is, and maybe they start a conversation they've been wanting to have with a colleague or their family member about what's happening. So
I mean, and there's I'm a big
It's a way of
person
reaching
for,
people.
I'm a big person for, it's a way of point about the rallies. You know, I'm a big person for truth telling. It's kind of like when people look at me, they think it's a very old fashioned. They always like to start with the truth of things. And the truth of things is Wales is being screwed by
It
billions
is.
of pounds that are owed to us. It's
Yeah,
being screwed on the Crouch estate, like
yeah,
850 million plus
yeah.
quid. 25% of which is going to the royal family.
I know, it's absolutely crazy.
The richest family, well,
Yeah,
definitely in the British, in the nations of Britain,
yeah,
but like one of the world's richest
it's
families.
absolutely
And
crazy.
they're taking 25% of that.
Yeah.
It's there is no way of justifying that. You know,
And this is a question for Plaid, I think. And it's difficult because I think sometimes Plaid listen too much to what Labour is saying. It's, that the Plaid Government is not just party or nationalist. You can't eat a flag, as Betty Williams, a former Labour MP for Conwy, said. We now see loads of Union Jack flags with the Labour Party, so we'll park that. But I mean, but I think Plaid also almost, and the national movement in general, then try to overcompensate by being too wordy or being too literate and being too concerned about underplaying, just emotion. I know sometimes just don't listen to what your opponents say. They're saying these things so that you feel rubbish about yourself. And I think Plaid is such a situation where they want to be seen as a credible party of government. You want to see Siôn as First Minister and whatever, and that makes sense. And they're concerned that some people who maybe is a bit concerned about the whole nationalist business won't vote for Plaid. But I don't know, I think there's a lot of anger out there. And if Plaid, as you say, and saying, is it time? I wouldn't come out saying Republican Party because I think they can just get you down a dead end. But I mean, maybe it's time to just start seeing some things which have been kept quiet for decades. And maybe that actually would connect with a lot of people who haven't really thought about it. And the lesson from this committee was, ironically, or maybe not, the maximalist position was actually more preferential to people or made more sense to a lot of people than the sort of incremental devolution part.
well, yeah, and
And it
this,
also cut out a lot of the nuances. Oh, am I Welsh enough? Do I speak enough Welsh? Is my Welsh good enough? And this kind of business. If you sort of Yes Cymru and independence, that's it. You're in the gang.
yeah, well, we did fall out about the name, didn't we, Siôn? But
Yes,
well,
I went for Yes Cymru and it's stuck, thankfully.
yeah. Um,
Well,
um,
I mean, how does Plaid just approach it then? Does it go for a more in your face, very plain talk, which I think they should do in any case, and that is happening. I'd like to see more, of course. And do they go maybe for an even more radical plain? So obviously they're campaigning on the Crown Estate and HS2, but do they? I don't know. Attack the
I
royal
mean, there's a
family
fundamental
or what?
unfairness and justice, isn't it? I think
Yeah,
regardless of one can debate the finer points of this type of nationalism versus that type of nationalism and what is
yeah,
internationalism. And,
yeah,
obviously, UK unionism is a form of nationalism. I mean, you could
yes,
lose yourself, there are hours in that, but there is a fundamental injustice about the distribution of resources to Wales at this point, and that is
yeah,
undeniable. You cannot justify the enormous investment in a piece of railway line that serves England only, and Wales not getting a penny of it,
yeah,
when our country is crying out for infrastructure investment in all types of fields. I mean,
yeah.
you don't need a refined analysis of what imperial nationalism is versus
Or extractive
yeah,
colonialism. Yeah,
extractive versus to understand the basic point, the basic truth, which
yeah,
is we're not getting a fair deal, and it's only by voting a different way that people are going to stand up in Westminster and think, oh, maybe we should give them the
yeah,
fair deal.
yeah. Okay, so in terms of getting to a situation where there's a Plaid government, let's say then just to play games, because this question will arise. And the journalist will ask, okay, in Plaid, is the biggest party, let's say, does it go into, and it's not unlikely to get 52% of the vote. That's not going to happen with any party. Who do you go into coalition with? Or likewise, also, Plaid is second. Does it go into coalition with, one presumes, Labour, or does it create some kind of an opposition government, or what? Or how
But
should you answer that?
I think the simple answer that that I would advise Plaid to say is, look, this is a competition between first and second. You know, Plaid is second and Labour is first. We could swap those, and that's the choice. That's the choice. So, you know, if people want to see a change of government, you know, if they're not happy with the way things are, then it's probably best to vote for the second place party to become the first to see that change. And I think then, you know, so, and I do think it is a realistic prospect to say Plaid will become the largest party.
Right.
It is a realistic prospect. You can't look at the polls and say it's unrealistic. It's a realistic prospect.
Yes.
And, you know, there is a fundamental choice between Plaid and Labour at this election. I think it's fair to say, because Plaid, as the second party, is the most obvious party who could form an alternative government. So, you know, running a minority administration is possible. You know, that's what Salmon did from 2007 onwards. You know, that is a realistic option. That would be a sensible answer to the question. Obviously, we don't, you know, it's very difficult to guesstimate, you know, to work out, you know, to hypothesize about how the maths will fall. Obviously, the Greens do have a chance of getting some seats. They would be the most natural partners for Plaid. They're the closest politically to Plaid, and so, you know, those would presumably be Rhina Piodwa's first option, if they were, you know, presuming they are needed. Now, the question if Plaid is first is whether Labour will support Plaid, not will Plaid support Labour. That's a question for them, and that's how I would frame the question, because I think that's a reasonable assessment to make, i.e., can the second place party become first? They're not that far behind, they could. So the choices between those parties, you can fairly say the choices between Plaid and Labour, and Plaid is aiming to be the largest, not the majority party, the largest out of a plurality of parties.
Yeah.
And then it's a question of who's willing to support Plaid, and will Labour support Plaid? You know, so I think, will the Greens and Labour support Plaid? And I think the answer probably is yes. So, you know, a Plaid Cymru government, you know, doing deals on a, you know, a non-formal, informal basis is a runner in this election.
Okay, what if, just to, again, to throw the screws into the engine, what if Plaid tell Labour, look, you know, we'll go into coalition with you, either as majority or minority party, if you devolve Crown Estate, HS2 money, and your policing and just judiciary. That's the price. You deliver that in this government, then there's a deal. If you don't, then, you know, we're walking away and do a rainbow coalition as we nearly happened in 2007. Say, okay, we'll talk to
I genuinely
Tories.
don't think that's the question that needs to be answered, because if you're the largest party, that you know, if you're the biggest of the parties that got the plurality, then the question is not for Plaid. The question is for the other parties who you're going to support. So, you know, I don't see it as realistic that you would go into that Labour would go into coalition with Plaid as Labour in second place. But I do see it as realistic that on an issue by issue basis, they would support some of the policies they're putting forward. Because I think when Plaid become the largest party, the voters will have said, "Oh no, we want Plaid to run the government." But they, you know, they're not saying don't work with other parties to get certain policies through. But I don't think you're looking at a formal coalition in that circumstance.
Right. Okay, I'll just press on this because I think it's worth discussing. I mean, in a way, and this is something where Professor Richard Wyn-Jones in Cardiff has said, you know, the Plaid's been a very effective, like, pressure group on Labour, and also to some extent, surprisingly for a political party, unjealous of its powers. That is, Plaid have been ready to sacrifice, in one respect, its own powers in short term to get what it sees as being long-term gains for Wales. So, you know, the referendum in 2011 to get more powers, the increasing number of seats in the Senedd. The Plaid say, okay, fine, these things are worth playing, even if we don't get a benefit in the elections. You know, these are long-term things Wales need. So coming back to what if someone Labour says, look, we'll devolve these things, you know, HS2, Crown Estate, policing judiciary. That's big. That would be a big plus for Wales, especially building onto independence. And that could be used, well, should Plaid be using that as some kind of leverage in terms of against things done or to get in support in different parties or whatever. I mean, we're looking at the oncoming budget for the Senedd, which will happen soon. I don't remember when. Should probably be saying, look, we'll support the Labour budget, but devolve, Crown Estate. That's the deal,
Yeah, I think we're in a very different circumstance. I was
Right.
to some extent involved in discussions in 2005 on the margins. That there is no obvious next step other than independence, and Labour opposes independence. The only party that can deliver it, perhaps with the support of the Greens, is Plaid Cymru. It's a fundamental question in which divides the parties.
Yeah.
So, I think Plaid Cymru should be demanding the right to hold a referendum on the question, an unfettered right to hold the referendum on the question at the time and in the time of its choosing. Obviously, the wording should be agreed with the appropriate regulatory body in Wales about the wording, but the fundamental question is who it's obviously the people of Wales who have to decide whether Wales becomes an independent nation. It's the government of Wales that should be deciding the wording and the timing of the question within reason of what's reasonable in the view of an impartial body, isn't it? So that should be the main aim, is having the right to hold the referendum. Now, is going into coalition making that more likely? I don't think so. I think electing a Plaid Cymru as the largest party is going to make that likely, and it's also going to make all of the other things you said more likely. But I think we're in a different position. We're in a very different situation than we were, 17 years ago now, or whatever it was. Because there is no natural incremental. I'm not an incrementalist, by the way, but there is no natural incremental step. And I don't think people want incremental steps. I think they want a bigger change than that. And, that would be my answer to the question. And as I say, I go back to the fundamental point. Normally, a race is most likely to be won by the first or second place. And the second place who's got the best chance of getting, beating the current leader to the first. It's not rocket science. So that is the choice. And that is how the choice should be framed. It is interesting how so many Labour social media commentary is like, oh, Plaid Cymru doesn't exist. Have I ever heard of what? They don't want to accept that reality because they don't want people to realise that that's the choice. And the reason they don't realise the choice is because they fear that actually they know that if people did know
it's
that,
a better choice.
They think, oh, well, yeah, we'll go for Plaid. So that's the fundamental answer. And I do genuinely believe that largest party is in Plaid's grasp, and they've got a lot of very clever, talented people working on it. But it's a lot. It's going to take a lot of effort and resources.
Yeah. Well, I think there needs to be a mass campaign with local branches doing stuff on the street and things like rallies. No, I'm talking rallies. I'm not talking about parading through a town. That's a necessary message. But street corners, getting leafleting the ward, leafleting the area, the constituency beforehand, and getting the local Senedd members or Westminster members and local council to say a few words, and and then develop on that. But I think something needs to be done in person on the streets, I think, not just social media. And that, of course, then builds people then who will go out canvassing, who will give more money in the future. We've only got about 5 or 10 minutes left, Carl. As we are in this, we'll discuss in the next Senedd elections in May 2026. You're listening to Radio Yes Cymru, by the way, on your local favourite podcast. Give us a follow and a like and share with your family and tell them about it. We're also on the Yes Cymru YouTube page. So, Carl, we're so implied, okay, biggest party in 2026. What kind of policies should Plaid be prioritising and get it done? Partly just to make a good, competent government and stuff which people want, but also with an eye on going for independence, which is the whole point of the party.
Well, yeah, that's a big question. I'm not going to, thankfully, I don't write a fancy manifesto, but I would focus on the massive injustices in terms of the distribution of power and wealth.
Right.
that has to be addressed. People can't afford to live, and we need to introduce policies to mean that.
Okay, just to zoom on that. I mean,
I'm not going to give you like
no.
a list
Okay,
of the
I
exact
just got to.
policies, but that would be my direction.
Okay, well,
I think
I am going to push a bit more on that, Carl, but just before we do that, my sort of feeling is that people agree with that. I think people, how that's implemented, different one. I think people are quite suspicious of the free stuff policies, getting stuff for free. Now, I'm a big fan of what was in the Plaid's last election for the Senedd, which is giving money to people with kids, because that's a big investment for the future, and So I think that's on a different scale of free stuff. I don't know. I think if it comes over too gimmicky, I think people don't like it, and it can sound a bit patronizing or paternalistic. So I think there needs to be structural change, and I think people need to see that. The trouble with that, of course, it doesn't necessarily happen for 18 months, 2 years, 3 years even before it's seen to work.
I tend to think of it in terms of like the provision of services and the basic fundamental rights that people should have, like the right to and rather, I'm framing it in the wrong way, but I think that people should have a home that they can afford to live in, and it's not a source of worry for them. And which is why I'm a very strong supporter of rent controls and the control of the housing market, and bringing the public sector back into the provision of housing in a big way, because it's a fundamental basic service. So that's not free, it's not free stuff.
No, I would class that in a different way to fees. I think
that's
when I'm thinking about free stuff, what I'm thinking about free stuff is kind of thing which is sort of play, right, essentially, where it's seen as, look, we're being very nice, giving you stuff. I mean, I think I would put that, that's a more structural change, which will also could upset a lot of people who do own, their old family house, which they now rent out to a couple of students, and it's very popular here in Aberystwyth or whatever, because there's a lot of people who aren't particularly rich, who that kind of policy could they feel is an attack on them.
But I think all those people do realize that they agree with that there's a common good in people having a safe and secure home that they can afford.
Yes.
I think
I would package that as saying we need to have places where people can, if they want, raise a family. So not everyone wants to raise a family, not everyone can. But I think people understand that, there's a crisis in terms of housing for younger people, young couples, they can't afford a place, they can then start a family, schools are closing, all these kinds of things. So, I mean, I think if it's packaged as it is, which is an investment in the future, because we want young people to have experience to stay or come back to Wales, and I think that'll be a very popular theme with a lot of people. You've seen the huge outbreeding of young people. And I think you talk to anyone from whatever town, be that Aberdare, Lampeter, Llangefni, people are very concerned that the place is getting old. And I think putting
common
policies
ownership has a lot of
yes, of course,
the role that it should play in housing, and it's not abnormal for countries to do that. It's about providing people that security that you can do, which Thatcher stole for the right to buy.
Yes, well, it's investing in our future, and it's investing in viable communities with a good balance of ages and skills and professions.
The other aspect is the geographic redistribution, isn't it? What we have is a very Cardiff-centric government, which you can overplay that, but there needs to be a genuine geographic balance to the way the government is investing, and it's certainly not happening at the moment. And you can't blame anyone, whether they live in the valleys or in the West, in seeing a massive lack of investment in infrastructure and facilities for people here. It's not good for a country to create just one center of development, or one geographical area that's so much stronger than the others. So there is a basic question of but having fair geographical investment, which is part of also linking, connecting communities and connecting the whole nations now. So that also is an aspect that I think is important. As I say, I'm not going to attempt to write the manifesto now, but I think I think effectively you're asking me what would my priorities be, and those would be some of them.
Right. Yeah, and I think this is the crazy thing about the British mentality in Wales, be that the Labour Party, the Tory, whatever. The most effective ways and simplest ways to get good jobs in Wales is to devolve powers to Wales, because then you, by definition, have to employ people on very high wages to do those exact jobs, which already been done, but in England, in London, and those jobs then can be located wherever you want. So I think Wales needs about 8 cities essentially, isn't it? So Swansea could be capital of something, I would say finance or something like that. Things to do. Bangor could be very important place in terms of the ecology and development, or as headquarters for that kind of infrastructure in terms with renewable resources. Aberystwyth, I'd say something like Haverfordwest, Newport, somewhere on top of the valleys, Merthyr, but not up to town parking, and then certainly someone in Clwyd, without Exham or whatever. But we need to have strong local places as well, where young people stay and they're having a good life there, and there's good things for them to go and see. And this is again the crazy thing about the cut in investments in culture. It's so
what
cheap.
we don't want to do. I think what we've seen in devolution, and my big thing I've talked to you about before is that I believe that the devolved system of government is just like a mere shadow of what an independent Wales would be like, because it's like it's as alien to it's as alien. Independent Wales is as alien to a devolved Wales as is the pre-devolved Wales was, or if not more, more the case. What we don't want to do, and what I'm concerned too much is happening, is we've got, to an extent, different institutions effectively following the similar policy agenda, which is concentrating development in one part of the country. It would be ironic. What we can do is have the irony of when we get the HS2 money, spending it unfairly within Wales, isn't it? What we need to do is develop a non-extractive, community of communities.
Yes. I mean, we've got something called Arfor, which is for essentially the Welsh-speaking West, essentially. So Gwynedd, Môn, Ceredigion, and Carmarthenshire. They should have included Pembrokeshire, but there we go. And that's a good idea. If you're living here in the West, as we are, Colin, in Aberystwyth, you see these adverts coming up on Facebook and stuff. And there's some money there in terms of trying to generate people to start businesses, to locate in the West, getting some good ideas together. That's all good stuff. I like that. The problem is the budget is so small, it's about £2 million, and it's literally about the kind of money which the National Library of Wales has lost, which in terms of Aberystwyth is basically a big factory in terms of what employing about 300 people. It's about probably 200 something by now. It shouldn't be the law, and we're taking this money from, and that's not a criticism of Arfor or the idea either. But I mean, we're talking about tiny sums here. We've just seen basically Lampeter University closing down. Had that railway line been built with the objective run money from Aberystwyth to Carmarthen, then my guess, Lampeter University could be still open. If you can't get to a university on train and you're a student, then it's still behind into nothing. And this is kind of lack of decades, if not centuries, of lack of investment, which has seen the bleeding out of Wales. And I think we need to just be blunt about it.
I think what you see in stuff like Arfor, there's a lot to be said about that. You see glimmers of a different type of approach, don't you? You see it.
Yeah.
It's like,
and it's done in cooperation with unionists.
You can see actually, you could reimagine how we do economic policy, and this is, perhaps an example of how it could be changed. But that having an economic model that is suited to Wales rather than one that is still based on an extractive system is like a fundamental part of.
Yeah. So I think we need to be building the nation, and think, making sure we have a place for the generations to stay here, to enjoy themselves, have a good quality of life, and that that we can attract the people who've left here, and we shouldn't be sending them out with this Senedd network, which is literally funding the brain drain without any kind of real structure where getting those people back, and then the party complain they can't find enough doctors and teachers and stuff. But look, we've come to the end of our discussion. Colin Nosworthy, former SPAD, the Special Advisor in the government, former Communications Director in Plaid Cymru, and also the founder of Melin Drafod pro-independence think tank. Thanks for joining me on the Radio Yes Cymru. We'll put the links to your various things at the bottom on the YouTube if you can want to join with that. You've been listening to myself, Siôn Jobbins, here on Radio Yes Cymru podcast. Please give us a follow, share the information, share the good news, tell your friends, because we're trying to build an ecosystem of a Welsh pro-independence social media to combat the Godzilla of the right and the anti-independence movement. Colin, tan tro nesa, until next time, thanks for making time to speak to us on Radio Yes Cymru. I will see you again in the future, I'm sure.
Diolch yn fawr.
Hwyl, croeso.